welcome to my channel. I'm Talia from Talia's Crochet Creations, and today I'm going to be showing you how to achieve your satin sleeves. This pattern is the Hexie sweater, which I'll link below. And what you'll need for this tutorial is stitch markers, about 10 or more depending on your armhole width or length. You need scissors, or needle, waste yarn, and then yarn from your actual sweater to seam the sleeves together. So I found 2 ways that you can seam your sleeves together, and I'll be walking you through those processes in this video. So this is the Hexie sweater. I did a size small and I blocked the sweater lightly so seaming would be a little neater. Those edges will be weaved in once the sweater is completed. And this is the sleeve that we're going to be seaming onto the body. And that's the rounded edge for the shoulders. So what you'll do is you take the rounded edge and attach it to the center of that top part of the shoulder seam with a stitch marker. So you want to be sure that you're on the center part of your sleeve to match the center part of the shoulder, where the front and back portions meet. Then you want to take your second stitch marker and line it up with the bottom portion. You're going to look for the row where your decreasing on the sleeve begins and use the stitch marker to attach it to the bottom of the armhole on the body of your sweater. Now that you've done that side, which is the back part of the sweater, you're going to repeat the same steps for the other side. You look for the decreasing and attach it to the same place you just did at the bottom. But make sure your sleeve is turned in the right direction, like so. And you're going to take that third stitch marker and attach it to the bottom of the armhole on the body. Now that you have the 3 stitch markers in place, you're going to line up the rest of your sleeve to fit into the curve of the body of the sweater. If you choose to use stitch markers only, you're going to place one evenly down the opening, but you want to start from the top part, so most of the perfection is shown at the top, and if you have any excess part on the sleeve, you can tuck it away under the arm neatly once you get to the bottom. So go ahead and start lining up your sleeves to the body and attaching the stitch markers. So that's one option. Another option would be to baste it with the waste yarn. a needle, which I'm going to show you on the opposite side. You want to get a high contrast color and a heavier weight preferably than what your project is made with, and measure about 4 times the length of the armhole so you have enough to take you from top to bottom. So thread your waist yarn or your contrast yarn on the needle, and you don't want to make a knot. Simply attach it to the center of the shoulder seam again, but leave a little tail so you can easily pull it through and pull it out once you start doing the seaming permanently. So there you have your little tail, and now you're just going to sew in and out down the entire armhole. It doesn't have to be perfect or neat because it's going to be pulled out as you seam permanently. Doing it this way takes a lot more time, but it allows you to see if you'll need to do any adjustments. Like I mentioned before, you want most of your perfections up at the top on the shoulders. So this allows you to see if you'll have any excess where you'll have to tuck away at the bottom. Either way works. Stitch markers are using the contrast yarn. It's just the stitch markers are a bit faster, and the waist yarn takes more time, but it gives you a visual on how the sleeve will look once it's seamed. It's just up to you which one you prefer to use. Once you get to the bottom, you can go ahead and take that stitch marker out because the yarn will now hold it in place. You want to make sure you're at the spot on the sleeve where your decreasing began, and just pull it all together, and there you have it. So now that we've prepped both sides for seaming, I'm going to show you how to sew it all together, laying flat. Whether you choose to use the stitch markers or the waist yarn, it's entirely up to you. So I'm going to sew it flat using the waist yarn side. So you thread your yarn needle with the same yarn that you use for your sweater or your top, and I doubled the threading, and you're gonna start at the same place, right at the top at the center, and I measured about 6 times the length of the armhole this time. So go ahead and measure out your piece and make sure you have enough to sew from top to the bottom of the armhole. Once you have that all figured out, you reattach to the center of the shoulder seam, and that waste yarn you'll begin to pick it out as you move along. Only remove a little at a time that you're comfortable with working. And for this tutorial with the seaming method, we use the back stitch seam. So since you're working with a longer piece of yarn, you're gonna have to pull do a little bit more pulling. But as you go along, the thread gets shorter and you won't be pulling that much. So go ahead and use the back stitch seam and pull out the contrast yarn as you move along. During this part, you'll probably see me doubling back a few times, and that's only because I felt my gap was too big, so I double back to make sure it's secure. So this part, just take your time, make sure you're going through the top parts of the sleeve into the top part of the armhole, so you don't go too much into the sleeve, so you have an even seam going right down. So I went off camera a little bit until I got to the bottom. And there you can see we're on the last pole for the waist yarn. We have a little ways to go, not much ways to go until we get to the bottom portion. So keep seaming until you get to that stitch marker or the center where you attach the at the bottom of the armhole. As you get to the bottom, this is where you want to remember that if there's any excess of the sleeve, any imperfections, you want to tuck it away neatly right underneath the armhole, and that's if you have any. You want to continue to seam until you get to where your decreasing began on your sleeve. So even if you're not using any stitch markers or waist yarn and you just want to wing it, you know, that's where you want to end your seaming. When you get to the bottom part, you get just so you know, you're gonna have to maneuver the sweater a bit just to get that underside worked properly, just so everything lines up neatly. And there you got to the end. You're gonna leave the remaining portion of the sleeve unworked until you seam the opposite side of the armhole. That part of the sleeve is going to be seamed last. Go ahead and fasten off that part of the that section because we're completed with that, and then we're going to do the opposite side, but I'm going to show you how to do that part on the mannequin. So now that you're on the mannequin, you want to, if you have a mannequin and want to seam it here, you want to put your sweater on the wrong side. And you're going to measure another 6 times the length of the armhole 6 times. And go ahead and remove your first stitch marker and reattach your needle, reattach the yarn to that center part of the shoulder seam again. So you want to line up the seams a little above the edge of the mannequin shoulder, so that's the edge, but you want to seam a little higher above that, just so that it rests partially on the chest part of the mannequin. And you're going to go ahead and use the same method, the same backstitch method of seaming. And just remove your stitch markers as you go along. Again, you'll see me doubling back if I felt the gap was too wide. And doing that is entirely up to your discretion, but you don't want any gaping holes. You know, once you've completed your seaming, you take your sweater off and you have a gaping hole. So just to be sure, I double back sometimes. I have a little camera shake, sorry about that. keep going and just continue to remove the stitch markers as you get closer down to the bottom. As you seam further, once you get down to the bottom, you're gonna just keep bringing your sweater up so you can continue to work on that chest area. Once again, keep bringing it up, and as you get to the bottom, just remember a little more maneuvering just to get the underside sewn. Bring it up once more. And just continue your seaming. So now we've gotten to the edge and there's a little excess going on there. So what you do, you line up the bottom first and then just make sure that excess part is sewn equally into the body. And just even it out as you go along. And just keep going, and remember that if you don't have the stitch marker there for some reason, you can just seam until you get to the part where your decreasing began on the sleeve. You want to match that up to the bottom of the armhole on the body. And that's about it. So you go ahead and fasten off, and for the remainder of the sleeve, you're just going to reattach you're gonna do measure enough yarn a couple times against the length of the remainder of the sleeve, and use the same back stitch seaming method and connect the two sides from the front and back part of the sleeve, and just continue down the middle until you get to the wrist part of the sleeve. And I do recommend blocking your work once again once the seaming has been completed, so it lays flat. And there you have the opening. With that part, you're just gonna seam together. You can do that on the mannequin, or you can take it off. It's entirely up to you.